Congress and their staff members. The Senate will break from 12:30 to 2:15 Eastern this afternoon. They'll attend their weekly party caucus lunches. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Spirit, you are our only safe haven. Give our senators this day the courage and strength of spirit to continue to serve you and country. Reinforce within them the belief that with your help, they can make a substantive difference in their nation and world. May they refuse to cower in adversity, to compromise bedrock principles, or to turn their backs on those who need them most. Restore in them an equanimity of temperament that can dispel their doubts and fears. And Lord, today we thank you for the nearly 4 decades of faithful service by Alan Fruman, our parliamentarian, as he prepares to retire. We pray this prayer in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., January 31st, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader.
Morning Leader remarks. The Senate will be in a period of morning business till 11:30 today. The majority will control the first half. The Republicans will control the final half. Following that morning business, the Senate will begin consideration of the Stock Act. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. I'm told that S. 2041 is at the desk and it's due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S. 2041, a bill to approve the Keystone XL pipeline project and provide for environmental protection and government oversight.
Mr. President, I would object to further proceedings with respect to this bill at this time.
The objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Mr. President, for a few weeks in March of 2010, Alan Fruman was one of the most talked about men in the entire city of Washington. The Senate was poised to send a historic health care reform bill to President Obama's desk for him to sign. Excuse me. But the usual procedural hurdles stood in the way. Health care policy staffers were camped out in Alan Fruman's office studying Senate procedure and precedent. But despite the pressure, despite the national spotlight, Mr. Fruman remained calm and professional through what must have been one of the most intense moments of his career. And for a very few weeks, every Capitol Hill reporter knew his name for sure. His bespectacled face was on every political news blog. Every political science professor talked about him. Even a few folks outside the Beltway learned what on earth was a Senate parliamentarian. What did they do? He was briefly a Washington celebrity. But for those of us who work in the Senate, Alan Fruman has always been a star, even when very few of us knew who he was or what job he did. But it didn't take us long after coming to the Senate to learn that quickly. Alan has served in the office of Secretary of the Senate since 1977. In his 18 years as chief parliamentarian, he has made countless difficult decisions with composure. He has a knowledge of complex rules that certainly would be deemed to be extraordinary. These are rules that are convoluted, and the procedures are somewhat unique, but he understands every one of them. And he is, above all, impartial to a fault. And, Mr. President, I have been upset at Alan a few times when I wish he weren't so impartial, but he has been always impartial. That's why he's the only parliamentarian ever to be hired by both Democrat and Republican leaders to serve in this crucial role. In fact, he was retained in his position despite a change of Senate control 4 times by 5 different majority leaders. One cannot be an effective parliamentarian without being fair-minded and judicious. But Alan Fruman also brings to the job a willingness to hear both sides of an argument and consider every side of the issue. He has patience. I've never heard him raise his voice. I've never saw him to be agitated. He's always calm and cool. And what a wonderful example he is for all of us. The truth is, Senate parliamentarians aren't simply appointed. They grow into the job. So I'm pleased that the talented Elizabeth McDonough, who has worked for Alan for a decade, will succeed him. Elizabeth will be the 6th person to hold the job of parliamentarian since it was created in 1935, and the first woman. She steps into very large shoes. I'll miss Alan's experience and guidance greatly, but I wish him all the best in his retirement. But he's really not going to retire. He's going to continue to edit Riddick's Senate Procedure, the official book of Senate Procedure, and no one is more qualified than Alan to do this. Congratulations, Alan. Thank you very much for your service.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
let me also add some words about Alan Fruman. For those who aren't aware of what the parliamentarian does around here, he's sort of like an umpire in a ball game, calling balls and strikes. Shouldn't surprise anyone to hear that we haven't always agreed on those calls, but it's not an easy job to be an umpire for 100 senators. It isn't easy to keep up with 200 years of precedents. And to Alan's credit, he never hesitated to admit when he thought he got something wrong. Alan has a deep love for the Senate and the people who make it work, from the elevator operators and the cooks to the most senior senators. He keeps up relationships with all of them. He cares a lot about this institution, and he's got the service to show for it. As the Majority Leader indicated, Alan's been here since 1974, longer than all but just a handful of us, so he's really seen it all. We'll miss his devotion and his intellect. We're glad he'll be able to spend more time with his wife, Jill, and his daughter, Allie. I know they love to travel. Hopefully they'll be able to do more of that. So thank you, Alan, for 4 decades of service to this institution that we all love and admire, and good luck in everything that lies ahead. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, last night the Senate voted to proceed to the Stock Act, a bill, incidentally, that was co-authored by 2 Republicans. And I'm glad the Majority Leader is going to allow amendments for a change. Up until a few years ago, the Senate had been known as a forum for open-ended debate. The minority party may not have always gotten its way, but at least it knew it would be always heard. It's something we haven't done nearly enough of these past few years, and I hope it doesn't prove to be a false promise. I expect senators on both sides of the aisle will have a number of amendments to this legislation, but one thing that stands out is the fact that the President is calling on Congress to live up to a standard that he isn't requiring of his own employees. So I think we can expect at least one amendment that calls on the executive branch employees to live up to the same standards they would set for others. If the goal here is for everyone to play by the same rules, that shouldn't mean just some of us, and it certainly shouldn't leave out those in the executive branch who, after all, have access to the most privileged information of all. And so the goal here in the course of this floor debate will be to make sure that the executive branch, those most likely to take advantage of insider information, is fully and adequately covered by this legislation. But let's be clear. President Obama isn't interested in this bill because it would address the nation's most pressing challenges. Of course it won't. He's interested because it allows him to change the subject. The more folks are talking about Congress, the less they're talking about the President's own dismal economic record. And frankly, for a President who's presided over a 43% increase in the national debt in just 3 years and the stain of the first ever downgrade of America's credit rating, I can certainly understand why he'd want to change the subject. I can see why he'd rather be talking about Congress or the Super Bowl or the weather or anything other than his own failed economic policies. But the problems we face are too grave and too urgent. And every day the President spends time trying to change the topic instead of changing the direction of the economy is another day he's failing the American people who elected him. Now, the President can pretend he just showed up. He can try to convince people, as he tried to do this past weekend, that the economy is moving in the right direction. But he's not fooling anybody. Americans know that we're living in an economy that's been weighted down and held back by legislation he passed with the help of a big Democratic majority in each House of Congress. Americans know that we're living in the Obama economy now. We are living in the Obama economy right now. And they're tired of a president who spends his time blaming others for an economy that he put in place. They want the president to lead. I've yet to see a survey in the past year that shows Americans agreeing with the president on the direction of the country or the economy. The ones I've seen all say the opposite. Wide bipartisan majorities believe the country is on the wrong track. And for small business owners, the people we're counting on to create jobs in this country, the numbers are even starker. According to a recent survey conducted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 85% of small business owners say the economy is on the wrong track. 84% of them say that the size of the national debt makes them unsure about the future of their businesses. 86% worry that regulations, restrictions, and taxes will hurt their ability to do business. Just about 3/4 of them say the president's health care bill will make it harder for them to hire. In other words, it's a huge drag on job creation. So, if I were the president, I'd probably rather be talking about Congress too. I understand why he'd rather be talking about what Congress may or may not do rather than what he's already done. He'd rather be talking about what Congress may or may not do rather than what he's already done. But he's got a job to do. He was elected to do something about the problems we face, not blame others for our problems. He was elected to take responsibility for his own actions, not pretend they somehow never happened. Today, the Congressional Budget Office releases an annual report on the nation's finances. We don't know all the particulars, but I can tell you this, it won't paint a very rosy picture. Our fiscal problems are serious, and every day the President refuses to address them, they become harder to solve. So my message to the White House this morning is simple. It's time to lead. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11:30 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Mr. President.
The senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I rise to speak in morning business. Mr. President, many years ago, when I graduated from Georgetown Law School, I was offered a job by the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Paul Simon. He asked if I would join his staff in Springfield, Illinois, in the state capital, and if I would serve as his Senate parliamentarian. I jumped at the chance. I was in desperate need of a job with a wife, a baby, and another one on the way. Deep in debt, I skipped my commencement exercise to get out and get on the payroll in Springfield of the Illinois State Senate. The first day I walked in on the job in the Lieutenant Governor's office, they handed me the Senate rule book. It's the first time I'd ever seen it. And they parked me in a chair next to the presiding officer of the Illinois State Senate, the Lieutenant Governor, and said, "Now you're here to give advice." Well, I spent every waking moment reading that rule book and trying to understand what it meant. There wasn't a course like that in law school, or anything that gave me guidance as to what I was to do. I made a lot of stupid mistakes, and I learned along the way what it meant to be a Senate parliamentarian. It was a humbling experience in many respects to learn this new body of law and how it applied to the everyday business of the Illinois State Senate. It was equally humbling to be in a position where your voice was never heard, but your rulings were repeated by so many. I recall then that many years later, some 14 years later, I was elected to the United States House of Representatives. After serving 12 of those 14 years in the office of the Illinois State Senate parliamentarian, I cannot describe to you the heady feeling when I went on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. They handed me the gavel, and I actually presided over the U.S. House. After 14 years of silence as the Illinois State Senate parliamentarian, I was speaking before one of the greatest legislative bodies in the world. So I have some appreciation for the role of parliamentarian, and particularly for the contribution of people like Alan Fruman. In some respects, it's a thankless job, because you're bound to make some people upset. As the majority leader mentioned earlier, we respected Alan's impartiality as Senate parliamentarian, but many times would go back to our offices and be very critical of it at the same time. We had hoped that he would rule in our favor instead of the other way. But I can tell you this, he has been faithful to precedent, he has been faithful to the rules of the United States Senate, and that is all we can ask of a person who serves in his position. He has had to tolerate the titanic egos that occupy this chamber. I used to say that the majority leader is the captain of a very small boat full of titanic egos, and that is the nature of this institution. And Alan, I'm sure, has been called on more often than most to deal with the peculiarities of my colleagues and even myself. I wish him the best after more than 35 years of service to the Congress, both the House and the Senate, and his service here in the United States Senate. I'm glad that he's going to continue, at least on the research side, to establish a body of precedent that will guide the Senate and the Congress in years to come. Alan, thank you so much for all the service you've given to the Senate, to the Congress, and to the United States. And to Elizabeth McDonough, congratulations. It is great that you're going to be coming into this new role. I'm glad that it's going to be a precedent-setting in and of itself, that you'll be the first woman to serve as the United States Senate parliamentarian. We all respect very much your professionalism and look forward to working with you even when you give us disappointing rulings. Mr. President, I listened to the comments made by the Republican leader about how he believes that President Obama is trying to change the topic, not talk about the economy, and rather talk about ethical standards in the United States Congress. I have to say that this is an issue that resonates with me personally because, as I mentioned earlier, I've been honored to have been brought up in public service by two outstanding individuals former United States Senators Paul Simon and before him Paul Douglas. Both of these men had integrity as their hallmark. Even as people in Illinois disagreed from time to time with their positions on issues, they never questioned their honesty. And that's my background. That was my training, and I've tried to continue in that tradition. I accepted the standard that was first initiated by Senator Paul Douglas and carried on by Senator Paul Simon of making a complete income and asset disclosure every single year. I think if I look back now, I can trace it back to my earliest campaign, certainly back to my service in the office of Lieutenant Governor, that almost every year I've made that full disclosure. There was considerable embarrassment in the early years because my wife and I, as I mentioned earlier, were broke. And it showed a negative net worth because of my student loans. And we suffered some chiding and embarrassment over that, but over the years, even my poor wife got to the point where she didn't pay much attention every April 15th when I released all this information. What we're considering on the floor is a tough issue, though. The tough issue is this. When you learn something as a congressman or senator, what should you do to take care that you don't capitalize on that you don't turn that into part of a personal decision that might enrich you? And it's a legitimate issue, and I support the legislation that's on the floor, though I think it will be challenging to implement. I support it. We should never capitalize on insider information, private information given to us in our public capacity to enrich ourselves, period. No question asked. And what we have before us now is an opportunity to call for more timely disclosure of those transactions that members of Congress, in this case United States senators, engage in that might or could have some relationship to information that they learn in their official capacity. But I will quickly add, this is a challenge because, honestly, in our work in the United States Senate, we are exposed to a spectrum of information on virtually every topic. People sit and talk to us, those in official capacity and unofficially, about what is the future of the European community, what's going to happen there, and if the European economy goes down or up, what impact will it have on the United States. We learn these things in meetings. We think about them as we vote on measures on the floor, and obviously they're being discussed widely in the public realm as well. So drawing those lines in a careful, responsible way is going to be a challenge for us. But disclosure is still the best antidote to the misuse of this public information. I don't think it's wrong for the President to challenge us. And I don't think it's wrong for the Republican leader to challenge the executive branch at the same level. That's fair. You know I'm friendly to the President, a member of his party, and a personal friend to him before he was elected and still today. He should accept the challenge from the senator from Kentucky to take a look at the standards within the executive branch and see if they meet at least the minimum standard established by this legislation. And we should look at it as well in terms of our responsibility as senators. But I do take exception to the comments made by the Republican leader when it comes to the state of the economy and the role of the executive. The senator from Kentucky said there's been a change in the national debt since the president was elected by an increase of 43%, and I'm sure that's close to true, if not true to in detail. But look at the circumstances. Look at the circumstances. When President Clinton left office and turned the keys over to President George W. Bush, the national debt was $5 trillion, and the next year's budget would have been the third in a row in surplus by $120 billion. Not a bad welcome gift from the outgoing President William Jefferson Clinton. Now fast forward 8 years as President George W. Bush left office and handed the keys to President Obama. Quite a different world. Instead of a national debt of $5 trillion, 8 years later, it was $11 trillion, more than doubled under President George W. Bush, a fiscal conservative by his own self-description. And look at what he left for President Obama in his first budget, first year, $1.2 trillion deficit. Not a surplus, but a deficit 10 times as large as the surplus left by President Clinton. That was what President Obama inherited. As he said in the State of the Union address, we had lost 3 million jobs in the 6 months preceding. his being sworn in, and another 3 million before his economic stimulus bill was passed and implemented. 6 million jobs gone. A devastating impact on the economy. 750,000 people lost their job the month that President Obama was sworn into office. And now Senator McConnell comes to the floor and says that's Obama's fault. I don't think that's a fair characterization. I think President Obama would accept responsibility, not only for his time in office, but for those decisions he's made, but to saddle him with the legacy of the previous president and his economic policies, I think is fundamentally unfair. Senator from Kentucky says, and don't forget, it was on President Obama's watch that a rating agency downgraded the credit rating in the United States. It's true. But if you read the downgrade, it isn't about the state of the economy. It was about the state of politics in Washington. We were downgraded by Standard & Poor's because they believed that we were incapable as a divided government to make important decisions for this nation. How did they reach that conclusion? Perhaps it was because this divided government, with the Tea Party dominance in the House of Representatives, had led us into a position in 2011 where we faced 2 government shutdowns and 1 shutdown of the economy in the same year. This weakened economy, suffering from recession, still had to worry about whether the fights between the House and the Senate would lead to even more economic peril. That's why we were downgraded. Don't blame the president for that. We can blame ourselves, at least partially, for the downgrade. And let me say this too. We know that there is uncertainty about the future. People are still waiting for some certainty when it comes to the value of real estate, the future of jobs and business. I understand that. But things are moving in the right direction. Last week, we learned our economy grew at a rate of 2.8% in the last 3 months of 2011. Strongest quarter of the year, and it shows that the chances of double-dip recession are receding. In 2011, the unemployment rate fell from 9% to 8.5%. The private sector added more jobs in 2011 than in any year since 2005. The American manufacturing sector is growing for the first time since the late 1990s. The Republicans don't want to credit this president, but they should. 3 million new private sector jobs. The weakness in our unemployment figures reflects the loss of public sector jobs. Federal, state, and local employment has gone down as the revenues of government have decreased. But this recovery is still fragile. And those who come to the floor, and many have, and argue for austerity and budget deficit concentration aren't wrong, but their timing is wrong. This is the moment when we need to strengthen this economy and move it forward. I was on the Bowles-Simpson Commission. Understand, their deficit reduction did not begin until the first of 2013. We wanted to create enough time in that commission for the economy to recover and to come out of this recession. And those who argue that we should abandon that now would sink us even more deeply into a recession instead of on the road to recovery. We need to continue to act. We need to find those things which will strengthen our economy. Investment in education and training for our workers. Investment in research, whether it's at the National Institutes of Health or in other agencies of government, so that we can move forward with innovation to create jobs in areas like green and clean energy. And third, the development of our infrastructure. It is absolutely indefensible. This Congress has been unable to pass a highway bill, an infrastructure bill, to rebuild America. A trip I took to China last year was a stark reminder that this nation, China, is determined to lead the world in the 21st century. They are building in China an infrastructure to do it, while we nurse one that has been falling apart for decades. Can't Republicans and Democrats agree, even in a presidential election year, that we need a solid infrastructure bill that will rebuild America and create good-paying jobs right here in America at home? It is time for us to have a balanced plan and to work together to achieve it. Now, the President isn't trying to avoid the topic. The President addressed it head-on in his State of the Union address. Now it's up to Congress to follow. I yield the floor.
Good job.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, last Friday, Kevin Hagan White, a four-term mayor of Boston, passed away. In the city of Boston, in the shadows of Faneuil Hall, there is a statue today of Mayor White. It stands 10 feet tall, larger than life. There really could not be a more fitting tribute to a mayor and a man who was himself a huge figure in the history of Boston, and a mayor who helped to give our city the extraordinary skyline and the extraordinary spirit that it has today. He was a mayor who, more importantly, through 4 terms, led the city of Boston through a remarkable transition from times of division to a time of new international and singular identity for the city. He led the transition of a great city, but this good man and groundbreaking mayor was frankly much more than a transitional leader himself. He was a transformative figure in a city that, when it comes to history-making mayors, does not use the word transformative lightly. Mayor White's passing gives Boston and its people a chance to reflect on how one leader, one politician could help to reshape a major city in America, to some degree reflecting his own persona, bright and energetic. Kevin White was elected to City Hall in 1967, a time when big city mayors in America were political forces, even as the days of the all-powerful political machines were beginning to dwindle. In Chicago, there was Richard Daley. In New York, John Lindsay. In Los Angeles, Sam Yorty, among some of the big city mayors of our nation. But in Boston, Kevin represented a new generation of urban leaders. He was only 38 years old, filled with optimism and energy and clear ideas of what he wanted Boston to be, summarized perhaps in the notion of being a world-class city. He attracted brilliant, idealistic young people to help him achieve his goal. Brilliant young people like Barney Frank, Micho Spring, Ann Lewis, Paul Grogan, Fred Salvucci, George Regan, Robert Kiley, Beau Holland, Cecily Nuzzo Foster, Dennis Austin, and Clarence Jeep Jones, all of whom saw in him a reason to dedicate themselves to public service. When Kevin White moved into City Hall, some people assumed that they were getting a business-as-usual mayor, Irish and Catholic, typical and traditional. But times were changing. The political and social climate of Boston in the late 1960s was hardly traditional, and Kevin White was anything but your typical politician. He glided effortlessly between the old world and the new. No one had ever seen a Boston politician go to Rhode Island to get the Rolling Stones released into his personal custody after they were arrested, and then the next night, when they appeared at a concert in Boston, stand up and announce to a cheering crowd, "The Stones have been busted, but I sprung them." Kevin did just that in 1972, which happened to be right after the 18-year-olds got the right to vote. Kevin White opened up Boston's political system to African Americans, women, Jews, gay Americans alike. He spearheaded rent control. He decentralized the city government by forming little city halls in the neighborhoods. He made jobs for young people a priority. He organized outdoor summer activities known as Summer Thing. He refused to let Interstate 95 run right through the city in order to protect low-income homes and boost public transportation. But perhaps most importantly, he sparked a downtown renaissance that began with Quincy Market, now one of the city's top tourist attractions, and it became the heartbeat of the new Boston that is his legacy. Mr. President, Kevin White came to City Hall with an ambitious plan to build a new Boston, brick by brick, if he had to, and that's pretty much what he did. When Kevin White took office, Boston was in many ways still stuck in the 1920s. Virtually no new buildings in decades, a steady decline in population and jobs, flophouses in the Back Bay, Quincy Market, a ramshackle warehouse of butchers and cheese dealers. But Kevin and his new team at City Hall hit Boston like a bolt of lightning, eventually reversing the city's economic slide and laying the groundwork for the vibrant Boston of today. He had a vision. Boston was in Kevin's blood, and so was politics. His father and maternal grandfather had been Boston City Council presidents, and he married Catherine Galvin in 1956, the daughter of another Boston City Council president. He was elected Massachusetts Secretary of State 3 times before being elected mayor for the first time in 1967. Kevin White was the right man for the job at the right time, as he proved so importantly, so poignantly, within months of taking office, on April 5th, to be precise, 1968, the day after Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was assassinated. James Brown was scheduled to do a concert at Boston Garden that night, and rather than allow it to be canceled, as many suggested, Kevin arranged for the concert to be televised live in hopes of minimizing unrest. He even appeared on stage himself to plead for calm. He stood up there on the stage and he said, "All of us are here tonight to listen to a great talent, but we're also here to pay tribute to one of the greatest of Americans, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. 24 hours ago, Dr. King died for all of us, black and white, that we may live together in harmony, without violence, and in peace. I'm here to ask for your help. Let's make Dr. King's dream a reality in Boston. No matter what any other community might do, we in Boston will honor Dr. King in peace." That was leadership, and it helped. Cities across the country exploded in violence, but Boston summoned relative restraint, and James Brown called Kevin a swinging cat. Of course, difficult times lay ahead, a turbulent period of racial strife. But Kevin White sought to shepherd Boston through those difficult times, and in the process he ushered in the remarkable city that we know today. He did his best to hold the city together, walking the streets by reaching out, fighting with every ounce to get Boston where it is today. At one point, he led a march of 30,000 people to protest racial violence. Kevin White was, according to his most famous campaign slogan, a loner in love with the city. But this self-proclaimed loner did love Boston, and Boston loved him back. His wide circle of friends and former staff remained loyal and close throughout his life. He was, above all, a family man, devoted to his wife of 55 years, Catherine, to his 5 children, and to his 7 grandchildren. To all of them and to the rest of his family, we extend our deepest sympathy and a thank you for sharing Kevin with us. The devotion of Kevin's family was boundless throughout his long and valiant fight against Alzheimer's disease. From his diagnosis nearly a decade ago to the very end last Friday, they gave him all the love and care he needed to face his debilitating challenge with the same dignity and courage with which he served the city of Boston for so long. Mr. President, Boston is that shining city on a hill that John Winthrop, one of the founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, spoke about in 1630 as he sailed to America. It is a city teeming with people of all kinds, a city of commerce and creativity, a city of grit and greatness, and Kevin White helped to make it that way. I consider it a privilege to have watched his journey, to have enjoyed his friendship, support, and counsel, and I join with so many in thanking him and his family for his service. May he rest in peace. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
ask unanimous consent that we dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today in defense of the Constitution. I rise today to condemn the President for making appointments that are unconstitutional and illegal. Recently, the President appointed members to the National Labor Relations Board and to the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. He did so by saying we were in recess. Well, this is news to us because those of us in the Senate maintain that we were never in recess. This is something where the President has usurped a power never previously taken by a President and has decided unilaterally that he gets to decide when we're in recess. These appointments are illegal and unconstitutional, and I'm surprised. I'm surprised that no member of the majority party has stood up to tell the President so. Now, I'm not surprised that the President has engaged in unconstitutional behavior. His health care law is brazenly unconstitutional. His war with Libya was unconstitutional. He got no congressional authority. So for a man who once gave lip service to the Constitution, the President now has become a president who is prone to lawlessness and prone to unconstitutional behavior. Our founders clearly intended that the President have the ability and the power to appoint advisors, but they also separated that power and gave power to the Senate to advise and consent on these high-ranking officers in government. The President has gone an end around on this and has done something that breaks with historical precedent. It goes against the notion of checks and balances. In fact, the notion that underlies the whole idea of recess appointments is mostly a historic relic. Alexander Hamilton explained in Federalist number 67 that the power was included so that the Senate did not have to remain in session year-round to deal with nominations. But this was also done in a time when Congress would go out of session for months at a time to return to their farms and return to their businesses. Now Congress meets nearly year-round. So in other words, recess appointments should only happen rarely, in extreme occurrences, if at all. There also should be agreement that we are in recess, and there is no agreement that we were in recess. There's a lot of talk about bipartisan cooperation on the other side of the aisle, but I'm disappointed that not one senator has stood up to tell the President that this sets a terrible precedent, that this is a usurpation of power that is bad for the country, bad for the idea of checks and balances. I am disappointed that not one senator from the other side of the aisle has stood up to oppose this President on this unconstitutional power grab. This is an opportunity for us to stand together in defense of the Constitution. I state now unequivocally that if a Republican President tries to usurp this power, if a Republican President tries to define a recess and appoint people illegally, I will stand here on the floor and oppose him. This is not about being a Republican or a Democrat. It's about having respect for the Constitution, and these lawless, illegal, and unconstitutional appointments fly in the face of the respect for our Constitution. This is an issue of separation of powers, of constitutional authority, and of Senate prerogative. It is sad that not one member of the opposition party will stand up for the Constitution, will stand up to the President. Make no mistake, this is a huge breach of precedent. If the President is allowed to determine when we are in recess, nothing prevents him from making recess appointments this evening at 8 o'clock or on the weekend. If this is allowed to stand, if this precedent is allowed to stand, nothing stops the President from appointing a Supreme Court justice tonight at 8 o'clock. Is that the kind of lawlessness we want in our country? Are we going to completely abandon the advise and consent role of the Constitution and of the Senate? I ask today, is there not one senator from across the aisle who will stand up against this unconstitutional power grab? Is there not one senator from across the aisle who will say to the President that these illegal appointments set a terrible precedent, that these appointments will encourage a lawlessness, that these appointments eviscerate the advise and consent clause of the Constitution? I ask my colleagues from across the aisle, where is your concern for the checks and balances? Where is your concern for the Constitution? I am greatly saddened by this, and I hope the President will reverse course. I hope the majority party in the Senate will stand up for the Constitution, but I'm greatly disappointed in where we are in this debate. Thank you, and I yield back my time.